So I hope that by talking about the international perspective, at least from that angle, and then discussing with Adi subsequently, we'll get an idea about the variety of research career trajectories that there are in the international setting. And then finally, I'll talk about some leadership strategies for career development. Now, what this is about is just providing you with an overview of what I've found in the literature, matched up with my own experience of helping younger people become active researchers and moving on in their careers. And I present a lot of that information in written form on the slides, but you can take away the copies and have a look at that in detail, as I've said before. So let's go to the careers in the past. And this is really based on my own career. And I'll try and put that into a little bit of personal context so you can see how my own career progressed. First of all, I did my undergraduate science degree at the University of Sydney. I did an undergraduate research year, which was the 4th year of my undergraduate career. Now that was, at the end of that year, I was awarded a Bachelor of Science with honours. The honours was the research year. It's very much a basic training research year, very practical experience, actually doing research under the supervision of a senior academic, who at the time was a senior lecturer in the university. Not a professor, but a senior lecturer. And the examination of my work for that year was simply by thesis. I then, typical for my time in this career structure, I would have moved into doing a master's. And so that was a 1-year process, and this is a 3 to 4 year process. In my case, it was 3 years. But the average now in universities that I'm familiar with is more like 4 years, and I heard 4 years mentioned earlier today from your experience. After the PhD, what I experienced was going into a period of postdoctoral work. I was at the tail end, or at the end of a process whereby people could move directly from a PhD directly into a lectureship. The lectureship is the basic level of an academic career structure. Okay? In the United States, they're sometimes called associate professors. But in the British system and the Australian system, they were called lecturers. So if you did a PhD, then you could, in the old days, used to move straight into being a lecturer. Now, I know that you're doing a lot of teaching, and in this career structure, there was a lot of teaching involved. So I was even doing some teaching as an undergraduate research student doing my honours year. I was teaching in practical classes in physiology. So I was starting my teaching career then. I certainly did some similar teaching in the PhD period, but not giving lectures. I wasn't giving lectures, I was only training students in practical experiments in the practical classes. And then I moved into being, well, I did some years postdoctoral and then became a lecturer. Now, in the system when I grew up, this postdoctoral period here, it was very much encouraged that you did that postdoctoral experience outside of Australia. And so, in order to bring that into effect, what I did was I applied to the United Kingdom for a travelling fellowship, was awarded that fellowship, and my wife and I and our young baby, we travelled to London, and we spent 2 years in London doing research in London. And during that time, a position in my department came up at the lecturer level, which was the appropriate level for me to apply to, so I applied and I was appointed back in my old department. So this period of here involved some personal movement around the world in order to set myself into that career structure to get to that point of being a lecturer. So I was appointed as a lecturer, I set up my own laboratory, I started training students. I had PhD students and honours students. In other words, this level of student started to appear in my lab here, and the time difference between there and there was 6 years. Okay, so I'd had that 6-year period from I did a 3-year PhD. I had 2 to 3 years postdoctoral work, and then I became a lecturer. And I already started to engage with students. But all through this period here, I was promoted from lecturer to senior lecturer after a couple of years, and then senior lecturer to associate professor. And then I just wanted to explain about this step here. Now, the plus signs here mean that many people in the academic world in the United Kingdom, Australia, and other similar countries, they can finish their career at that level. So they can go on until they're very old at the senior lecturer level, or indeed at the associate professor level. Not everyone becomes a professor. So that would free up a position for a professor. Now, that was okay in the very old days. But what happened, of course, is that the university system grew. There were more and more students. There needed to be more and more academic staff. And if we only ever had one professor position in a department, then there was a jam, a log jam, as we call it, in the promotion of all of these people through to this level, and they could go no further. They could not get to professor because there was no professor position available. So what happened in my lifetime as an academic was that the university opened up the route for promotion to professor, from associate professor. And I didn't take that route because I was appointed a professor by appointment into another department. A professorship became available, so I was appointed into that position. But these days now, people can be promoted from associate professor to professor. Now, as I've said, all through this process here, it was a combination of teaching, community service, and research. So in order to aspire to go up to this level, the senior level here, we had to work extremely hard doing our teaching, administering the department, as well as doing the research, winning grants, doing the research, training students, running a laboratory, all that sort of thing. Had to happen all at the same time. So you're not alone in terms of working very, very hard, because everybody in this scheme has been working very, very hard for a long time. So that's the career structure as it was. Careers now are a little bit different because there are very many more options available to people, at least in the systems that I'm familiar with. So undergraduate career usually is the starting point. A PhD of 3 to 4 years, that doesn't change. A postdoctoral now has increased from 2 to 3 years. It's now a lot more than that. It's up around the 4, 5, 6, 7 years postdoctoral work before you're even competitive to become appointed as a lecturer. Because there are so many more people coming through this track than there are positions available at this level here. So what happens now is that many people from the postdoctoral level then move out and they try and find money through granting systems to become a research fellow. And that allows them the opportunity to spend 100% of their time on research. And there are...
In the same university?
In the same university, yeah. The Australian Research Council, for example, or the NHMRC that I mentioned before, they offer specific research career structures which are funded, salary funded, plus a little bit extra for the research activity. And that position is then held in a university or a research institute or any other approved organisation. So these people are really top performers in research, and they don't want to go down this route. They prefer to go this way, and they can get promotion if they're good enough, and they go through all these years. You can see here I've added in question marks here because there is still a long period of time at those levels. And you get up to, you can be promoted through here to professor, and a senior research fellow can also come back into the system as a professor. But they don't do a lot of teaching, but normally at that stage they will start to go back and do teaching, particularly at senior levels in the academic structure. But because of the growth in the system, this pathway here, what we've now been able to include is things like distinguished professors and laureate professors. These are super duper professors. because this promotion route has become quite common to professor, whereas before it was a logjam, you had to wait till somebody left. Now, because you can do it by promotion, there are a lot more professors around. So they've created this level of promotion for really, really good professors, and they are rewarded by being called a distinguished professor or a laureate professor. And in fact, you can go into this from this track here because the Australian Research Council and the NHMRC offer these super duper salaries for super duper professors. They are the best, highest regarded professors doing research in the system. So that career is open to them. But usually, somebody getting to this level has either jumped out of the academic track and gotten away from a lot of this teaching and work in this level here by doing these full-time research fellow positions. But sometimes these professors get all the way through, but what they've been able to do in their career is at a senior lecturer or associate professor or even at professor level, they've been able to talk to their head of school, head of department and say, look, I am really achieving a lot in my research. Here's my record of research. I really don't need to do a lot of teaching. I really want to concentrate on my research. So they build up an even bigger research portfolio. They train a lot of students. They get a lot of papers published. And as a result, they're promoted up to being a very high-level professor. So that's the career structure. Yeah. Professors funded by the Australian Research Council, there might be 20 in the whole country. But it's a next level of aspiration that people are going for. Now, there's a lot of words on this slide which I won't dwell on because you've got the words in front of you there. But what I wanted to point out is that in looking at those structures, what you have to look at is what is the function of a university. The functions of the university in terms of research are to develop human capital and develop talent, developing and deploying new knowledge and technologies, strengthening conditions for innovation, accessing finance, and providing spaces for open-ended conversations and entrepreneurial experimentation. And what's been realised is that all of these things actually require a different shape of what academic work should be all about. And the only point I want to stress this afternoon is that the linkages between universities, academics in universities doing research and industry has become more and more important. I mentioned earlier about the links between universities and industry for funding activity in universities. So it's necessary for academics in their research career to engage more and more with industry. Why is this important? Well, there are benefits for industry, so that industry has better access to research results, develop and test prototypes, gain a longer-term research perspective from the academics who are doing the basic investigations and so on. And industry has access to people who might be able to solve their particular problems. And of course, the linkages are that the industry can identify very good future employees for their industry. So that's an important function of a university, and this becomes a benefit for industry if there's a good linkage between the university and industry. What's the benefit for the university? Well, as I've said, there's the potential for additional resources, financial and otherwise. So big companies will invest in universities to support research staff to solve the industry's problems. So there's more money flowing into the university. Access to current technical knowledge and good practice, etc. Access to applied knowledge and improved image and reputation with the industry. Now that's an important point because I want to show you a quote. This quote here is, and I'll read it to you because it's very important. I've come across many academics who tell me that they are working in areas of public policy of the utmost importance: healthcare, housing needs, workforce participation, early childhood development, for example. Yet they shuffle uncomfortably when I ask exactly what policy changes they would introduce to address the problems which they have so carefully analysed. So academics are very good at analysing the problem, but they're hopeless at bringing up a practical solution. And this was his reaction to what the interaction between academics in the university and the world in general was like. he wasn't very happy about it. He happens now to be the Chancellor of a university in New South Wales. So he's right in there now. He left the public service to become a Chancellor, but this is still a very important quote from his words. Universities need to change their attitude to engage more with society, and academics need to come out of the university and engage more with society. And that underpins the linkage of research careers involving industry and other areas of government, for example. So, going back to the diagram of a research career, most of that's the same, except now I've included this box here, which is the box which entails businesses, industries, services, and society in general. And what we need to be producing is undergraduates who can interact with this part of society, and every other level of the system needs to be able to interact here. But our academic structures are such that it's not conducive for somebody who's a senior lecturer, for example, to go into industry, because they will lose their track through this process. They will lose credibility amongst their colleagues, and they find it very difficult to come back in and get promotion back into the academic world. It's because of the mindset of academics in universities. They can't accept that somebody should go into industry and work in industry for 3 to 5 years and then come back out again and expect to become a professor, because you weren't at the university for those 3 or 4 years. You know, you weren't winning grants, you weren't publishing papers, but you might have learnt a heck of a lot about what's going on in the industry to which you are relevant. And that is of value to society. But even in the UK, Australia, and several other countries similar to ours, these sorts of things are very hard to organise, because people just don't accept that you should go out of the university and then try and come back in. If anything happens, it's more often now that an academic will leave the university, get a job in industry and stay in industry, and never bring that experience back into the university, where once they come back into the university as a professor, they should be teaching the undergraduates about their future careers and bringing that industry experience back in. However, the mood is changing, because a couple of years ago, this group of young people called the Youth-Led Think Tank put out a publication which pushed for industry vouchers to put research where it matters. Okay, so they were suggesting to the government that the government offer a financial incentive to universities to allow industry to open up places for students to go out into industry while they're studying and then come back into the university to finish their degrees. Okay, so that was an idea that was put forward. Before I go on to this slide, I just also should point out that even on yesterday's paper in Australia, Australia's chief scientist actually hit the front pages of the newspaper by saying that science students in our universities in Australia are not being trained well enough because they have no industry experience, and when they complete their degree, industry doesn't know what to do with them because they have no practical experience in industry. And so he's looking to develop the debate about industry placement for undergraduate and research students and PhDs. PhDs should spend some of their time in the industry to which their research is relevant. So, I just wanted to finish off my part of the presentation with some concepts that are developing about what an academic career should really look like and what it could look like in the future. And this is a paper which was developed by our colleagues Hamish Coates and Leo Goedegeber. He's from the Netherlands, by the way. So you might be able to pronounce his name for me. They wrote this paper, which was really an analysis of of academic careers in Australia in particular. I'm sorry to emphasise Australia, but it's not too dissimilar to many other countries around the world. But it's the system that I'm most familiar with, obviously. And what they decided was that what we need to do is to restructure Australia's future academic workforce, and there are 8 strategies that they thought needed to be put forward, and these are the 8 strategies. So we need to reconfigure academic work, construct new academic profiles, etc. You can read all those things there. Interestingly, they put at number 5, engaging sessional academics, which is a big debate in our country about having part-time people who do the teaching. Part-time academics doing the teaching, which allows the full-time academics to do more research. Okay, that's a strategy that's out there. So what they have in this paper is the idea that we need to think very differently about what we ask our academic staff to do. So here we've got some roles for for academics. Okay, so there's a role for academics doing management and leadership. They should be doing some discovery work, integration of that discovery work into products and so on, do some teaching, application of all of that into good products. And so what is described here is a label which could be put on different academics doing different proportions of these sorts of activities. So you see here at top level is a classic academic who spends 80% of their time doing teaching and 10% on discovery research and 10% on integration of research into outcomes. So that's called a classic academic. And they might have a 1-year tenure. That is, they're only employed for 1 year to do that specific purpose. Then there's the entrepreneurial researcher who might be offered a 3-year appointment. They'd be doing 10% discovery, 20% integration of that research, and then application of that research in that 3-year period. So they're an entrepreneurial researcher, and their role in life is to move research out into industry. Then there's the engaged academic who might do 50% discovery research, 25% teaching, and 25% application of the research. You can see the different proportions. And then we get down to an entrepreneurial research leader who's a very long-term appointment. 25% is on management and leadership, 25% on discovery, but 40% on integration of all of that activity, and 35% of application of the research. And finally, the senior academic leader, 60% on management and leadership, 30% on discovery research, a little bit of teaching. Okay, so they're the sorts of different proportions of different levels of activity. In other words, not everyone is expected to do 30% research, 30% teaching, and 30% academic administration or community liaison. Let's divide it up, give different people different roles, and allow them to move around in those roles over time. And what you get to is a potential career structure which looks like this. Don't worry about the words on the screen or the blue dots or whatever, just follow the arrow. You can have a person who starts off as a researcher, moves off to become an engaged academic, has a period of time as a classical academic leader, then a research director, and then finally as a broker. Okay? Why should that not be possible? Why should that not be possible depending on the skills of the person involved? And what do we need to allow that to happen? That's one example. Here's another example. Here's a case where somebody was, a very good engaged educator. They became a classic academic, did some research, but then they got out and they concentrated on their education work. Then they became an administrator. Then they became an education leader. And finally, they went back and started doing research again. Why can't that be possible? Okay? So I need to move on, but what I wanted to just describe quickly, and you've got all these words in the presentation papers, these are indicative strategies that could be put in place to assist people develop their research careers and develop their research activities. So little things that can be done is providing some support for conference travel, grants for publications, new and PhD scholarships, professional development, research achievement awards. I heard somebody commenting just a little while ago about rewarding people for publication. A few other things there that you can read through. Commercialisation and startups. If you're wanting to move the research from the university base into industry, then the department or the university can provide innovation funds for new areas, potential commercialisation, seed funding for collaborations, etc. and providing support for people to write competitive research applications. These are very, very common ways of supporting people develop their research activity. And finally, on this slide, partnerships and collaboration. So you can see all the different ways in which things could be done. I'm not expecting the Vice Dean will pick up every one of these this afternoon and go off tomorrow and implement them, but there are some ideas there which would build on... Yeah, I know, but it will build on the other ideas. I mean, I heard ideas about information technology and improving the flow of information. Well, that should be on this list as well. Every idea that you've come up with on these pieces of paper should be added to that list. These are only some examples. HR good practice. Now this is a summary of some surveys that were done of international universities. It's a paper written by a lady called Ellen Hazelcorn. Each of these people that she interviewed mentioned their growing tendency to favour research activity, to align recruitment, promotion and career structures to research outputs, to measure performance on the ability to generate revenue on intellectual property, and to link academic workload to research performance and teaching level. So what that says is that senior people in academic units, in schools, departments, wherever they are, or even research institutes, need to be monitoring research productivity. That is, papers published, grants won, students graduated, and so on and so forth. And from all of that, you can develop a research performance basis. Other strategies which involve developing research activity include recruiting people, but you need to align the recruitment strategy to priority areas. Now, we talked earlier today about the possibility of focusing the faculty's research activities into a smaller number of areas. If you had the opportunity to recruit new people to build the research profile of the faculty, you might choose to appoint somebody who fits with the priority areas that you've identified. Why would you bring in somebody who's going to be just sitting on the side, as it were, not in the priority areas? You wouldn't do that because it'd be wasteful of resources. So then if you've got existing staff, you need to reinvigorate them, provide an incentive, reward and recognise research performance via promotion, salary and other benefits, etc. So again, you need to measure performance, but if you've got somebody who's not performing well, you need to give them the opportunity to perform well by perhaps giving them a period of time where you relieve them of some other duty to show what they can actually do. And if they can do it, then you can reward them for that. If they don't do it, then you can take other strategies to move them into something else. But you need to give people the opportunity to try and give them an incentive to do so. But if they don't perform, well, you have to take another strategy to move them into another area or sideways or indeed potentially out of the university. Training is important, and what we're doing this afternoon is part of that. Reorienting people, I've just mentioned that, and enabling. So you asked earlier, Adi, about small amounts of money versus large amounts of money. Some of the small amounts of money can be used for providing people with time away from teaching to do research. I've often talked about the idea that when I was an academic, I had 3 months or 6 months leave to do research, and I'd usually travel overseas to do that. But nowadays, what I'm thinking is that the research world is so competitive, you need to give people longer than 3 or 6 months, if possible. You know, it would be ideal to give somebody 3 years to go away from the university and really learn and do some really productive research full-time in somebody's lab overseas, and then bring them back. It's longer. I know it's difficult, but if that's really what the aim and the aspiration is, that's a target you might be setting for, say, 5 years down the track, being in a position to reward people with that sort of time off to do full-time research. Another slide showing all sorts of good practices. I won't go into that. Now, this is a comment for the leadership. And as you're all aspiring leaders, generic innovation management skills are required. include the ability to coordinate activities, select people, assemble teams, motivate workers, resolve problems, create a supportive environment, communicate and provide focus and leadership. And as I've said earlier, the confidence to kill an aging project and the ability to manage complex relationships is also useful. Okay, so when something isn't working, better to stop it somehow and find a way to do that. Finally, building a research culture is not a once-off project, but rather the result of an ongoing series of strategic policies and actions, etc. It's not without its challenges, especially in those institutions where research is relatively new or fragile. So what that says is that this activity of building research profile and building careers for younger researchers is a long time frame activity. And there needs to be a strategic direction, an aspiration, and a plan to get there which everybody owns and everybody can see what the plan is. And you've been working with some strategies around the walls here now and listening to all of this, and I hope that out of all of that something will come in terms of developing future careers. I think I'll stop at that point. Jody?
I want to show you how I arrive in my position right now. And perhaps that could also trigger your own thinking of where would you go from now to 10 years from now. So, so you all know now I'm 50 years, telling you my age. I graduated when I was 24 years, and that's back in '89. And then 1 year later, I became CPNS, 6 months to 1 year later. And then at that time, actually before I graduated, I was one of the student assistants helping Pa Rossi. Maybe most of you, or some of you know him. He's the, how do you say, the most killer person in the faculty. But a person who gives also very rich experience, very good education to the, very good mentoring for the students. So at that time, I was working at CCHC, Community Care Health Center, community-oriented health center. And I was working with Pak Laksono, and then Bu Ova, Pak Mubashir, and then Bu Yayi, and also Bu Titi Safitri, so at that time. And actually, compared to others, I was among the last to get the scholarship for doing master. So they left much earlier than me, and they got scholarship in a way, in an easier way than me. I had to struggle at that time. So I needed 4 years, 3 years actually, to get a scholarship for my MSc. And this is my own, how do I say? I wasn't supported by the faculty or anything, so I had to just struggle by myself and got this scholarship. So I finally finished when I was 29 years. And then here again is not an easy journey. You can all see that I had to do another master's thanks to Sweden, because they cannot, they don't recognize my master, even though this is in London. Institute of London is quite famous also, but you have to do your master in Sweden. So I had to do this. I got the scholarship for this. Just by the way of, I met a Swedish researcher in the stairs going to public health. Just like that. And then we talked for a few minutes. And from there, we developed this communication. And then she became my supervisor in my PhD. So sometimes collaboration, you never know. It can come to you just like that. Yeah, by, I don't know, taking Alan, for example, to go for batik shopping, and and then on the way, you know, I'll describe all the opportunities that we could. So sometimes it could happen just like that. And I then completed my PhD when I was 37 years. So yeah, and also between the PhD and the professorship, at that time I planned to have my professor in 45, when I was 45 years. So I was 1 year late for this. But even though I'm not bad, I think, by having a professorship at when I was 46 years. Yeah, so now here I am, and in terms of publication, this is not good, maybe, but also not so bad, but I arrived there. One of the lessons that when I look at your proportion, table showing the different proportion, and also when I look at myself, maybe one of the key is, if you look at this from 2003 to now, I didn't have a structural position. So that's the one that I avoided. So I wasn't a head of department, I wasn't a head of a master program. I just chair this one majorings, minat. This is still okay, because then it's a lot of teaching. And at that time, after I completed my PhD, I wasn't looking for positions at the faculty. So I had time to really develop research in this area. And then I set up this quality council in Yogyakarta. So all this, and I still do this, being a coordinator of a blog for undergraduate. We all know it's not easy. And this is not easy, and I'm not successful also yet of being the chief editor of the journal. So I think what I learned and what I can share with you is that I think the first 5 years after your PhD is really very critical for developing networking, because you still have a very strong communication with your supervisor. So this is how the networking and further research can develop. So, and that would mean also that as much as you can avoid, I would say, administration and bureaucracy is not good for your health, not good for your career in early years. So, but for that, you need someone to back you up. Yeah? You need a support from someone who understands this, because otherwise they will throw you very early to bureaucracy or structural positions. Yeah? So that's how I saved these two guys. Yodi and Tony. I said, well, sometimes the faculty offers them to become something. I said, no. You know, let them be the head of a research center, but not a structural position. We can still work together. I'm sure we can help each other without being or taking such an offer. For example, you have to sit in an organizing committee for, I don't know, seminars, panitia, seminar, ketua panitia, seminar that will push you to a lot of administration tasks. Yeah? Often even when we do research, because we don't have good support, you don't have financial staff, then you end up doing SPJ, a lot of those reports. And this actually takes a lot of time. If we put that together, that really takes a lot of your time. So then, of course, it comes back to us how we build this infrastructure or research team, so that the limited time that you have is used really for doing research, not for finding reagents and not for asking who has this equipment, but really to do the research. Yeah, even I know that colleagues, but not here, outside, sometimes they hire a person to do the teaching job for them. So if you have the resources, rather than us have to teach, you actually ask someone to teach for you. For master degree, we can actually do that. We ask the PhD students to also take part in the teaching at the master level. That is still possible. So, yeah, I'm just throwing you. These are my sharing, I think, for you, and perhaps we could could have a discussion from here, and also I'd love to also refer back to the slides that you have with all the proportion. I think that is also very good to reflect on where we are now. So, yeah.
Well, that depends on the doctor. I mean, I know some doctors who are desperate to get out of doing clinical work so they can do more research. Some doctors find doing the clinical work actually boring because it's the same sort of clinical question coming through the door every day. You know, it just becomes routine and there's no intellectual challenge in it, and so they get sick and tired of it. I know of a surgeon, a head and neck surgeon, who specialised in squamous cells carcinoma removal around the head and neck region, which is just awful. But he's given up a couple of days of his clinical work to come into an institute to do a PhD. And he's funding himself to do the PhD because he's earned so much money being a surgeon. He's getting a bit sick of all that. He'd rather answer some questions about the genetics of cancer and the cancers that he's dealing with as a surgeon. So he's giving up some surgical time to come into an institute to do some research. So, you know, it varies with different people having different attitudes and different opportunities. And if that can be created with a flexible way by the administrators of a university and a hospital, then allow people to flourish by giving them the opportunity to do what they really want to do.
Yeah. Another strategy I found is to also have research assistant, for example, in neurology, but not wanting to become neurologist. So I think it started, for example, in pediatric research office. They have a lot of researchers doing research in pediatrics, but they're not doing any clinical, also, I think now starting, well, oncology also have that team, so they can do a lot of research because they have research assistants. Usually this is medical doctors, up 2 years, 3 years, and they just do research. Or I've seen this in Taiwan, where they actually employ, this is a department that has a very strong focus on translational research. So what they did is they employed biomedical researcher, PhD qualification, and work with the internal department. So he is called then researcher in the internal department, but not specialist.
So could I give you an example similar to that, to my own experience? I talked to you about the professor in neonatal intensive care. I at the time was a professor in another department of the university. I had teaching, I was running the department, I had students in my laboratory, I was running scientific experiments in my laboratory, which were not unrelated to the clinical work that we were doing at the time, collaboratively together. And our work in the hospital, at least, was facilitated by the fact that we had a grant which allowed us to employ our research nurse. And the research nurse was doing a lot of the actual studies on the neonatal babies that we were doing some research with. So the two of us, the two senior people, were not often doing the studies ourselves. We did some of them, but not all of them by any means. But we relied on the research nurse to get a lot of the data that we were using to publish. So I had my busy schedule, the doctor had his busy schedule, and we coordinated by telephone whenever we could, or we met whenever we could, on weekends, on late evenings, or in early mornings, or something like that. We did what we could, but we relied on our research nurse, who was feeding all the experiments, not the experiments, the studies, and gathering the data. And then one of us would look at the data, write up the results, have a discussion, start drafting the paper, hand it to the other person to give a comment on the draft paper, and work through the whole process that way, just by doing whatever you could to find the time to do it. Does she need a microphone?
Yeah, I used to be a commander of the barisan. We as a researcher sometimes blaming anybody else, but actually it also depends on our attitude. So just say that if, for example, I'm a clinician and I go to the Netherlands after I'm a dermatologist, so I already have a very nice life as a clinician, as a dermatologist, but I just want to learn something that different before I get bored with the dermatologist saying that I think is a good advantage. And after I coming back to Indonesia, so firstly maybe I got a culture shock, and I try to blame anybody around me, but I don't think so. It will be benefit for 4 months blaming anybody. But firstly, have to blame myself. And I think as long as we create the time, if we create something and we prove to our head of department or our senior, they will be agree with the things that we do.
This is very, very important.
Yeah.
Because it really works well. It really works well when you've got a positive attitude there and you've got a positive attitude here. And I can speak as a Vice-Chancellor. The best experiences I had was when people would come into my office and say, I've got a great idea. I'd really like your help with this, and this is the way I think we should go about it. I was turned on immediately, being positive towards that person. The contrast was a person comes in to my office, says, look, my research is falling apart. I don't know what to do about it. I need more money. Please give me more money.
Do you want to help? Yeah.
And you can see the depression written all over their face. So, you know, what do I feel as a Vice-Chancellor when I've got this negative person in the room who's also, all they want to get from me is more money to do something which they have no strategy for, they have no plan for. Whereas the other person comes in the room 5 minutes later, bounding into the room, saying, I've got this great idea, I think this is what it's going to lead to, this is the way I think I need to get to do it. What do you think of this idea? Now, when you're a leader in a position such as a Vice Dean or a Vice-Chancellor or whatever, you've got to immediately make some assumptions about what you're seeing in front of you. And there's a lot of literature around in leadership circles which says don't immediately jump in and be negative. At least pause and at least listen and at least take some time to think. So the immediate reaction can sometimes be, if it's going to be a difficult issue, thank you very much for coming in to tell me about this. I need to think about it and I'll come back to you with an answer in a day or two. Don't immediately say no. And so that's the most important thing for all of you going forward, is be receptive and listen and at least appreciate what that person is trying to tell you about their aspirations. If they are positive aspirations, it's so much easier for you to deal with it than if it's negative. And comes to the same picture and appreciates what the group has actually designed and come to, and everybody owns the decision, then it's so much easier for the leader to operate within that space. Because everybody would appreciate why a decision is being taken as long as it's consistent with the general direction which was being set.
Alan, I have a question also about this.
This is hypothetical. Okay.
Yeah, I know. But I'm thinking because I mean Tridharma is what we all struggle with, and I'm just thinking if in a department we could somehow how do I say, position the lecturers in that department.
The critical thing in this is the first step in thinking about this. I wouldn't even put this slide into your discussion with anybody just at the moment. Yeah. But what you need, I think you've already started the process of scoping what is the capacity of the faculty and what are the aspirations of the individual members of staff in the faculty. Yeah? So once you've got that picture, you'll find that various people will slot into different boxes on this particular picture. And then you can start to manipulate the way in which you support the people to do a better job for what they want to do. So at the moment, as I understand it, you're really looking at these three boxes here for everybody. The engaged academic box is 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. When in fact some people might be better at doing a lot more teaching and other people might be better at doing a lot more research. And why not recognise that and leave the capacity to do it? But then have a plan for moving people around with those proportions. Maybe every 2 or 3 years do a reassessment of all of that to see how it's working, see who's performing. Yeah, and do it interactively with all the staff. But the most important thing is to communicate with the staff and talk to them about it, listen to what their aspirations are, and mix and match that as best you can. And sometimes there will have to be a compromise. You know, you can't give somebody 100% research 100% of the time. You have to compromise, and they have to compromise as well for the benefit of getting the work done that you need to do.
Experience with maybe different from point of view, Dr. Lia and you. I mean, I have met 2 professors in Kobe University. They giving up their surgeon and becoming basic researcher, and then they become good professor in basic science. And one is formerly as digestive surgeon, and another one previously as pediatric surgeon. And then after they took PhD in US, and they thinking that, oh, I'm not interested in clinician anymore, and then they just giving up their surgeon, and then after 5 years or 10 years, they become professor in basic sciences. So what do you think about it? And then my second question is, I am interested in slide page 4, careers now. So, page 4. Yeah. Yeah.
Page 4. Naik lagi. Naik.
Thank you. Instead of after postdoctoral for 6 years and then continue to lecture, instead of that, you make a new fellow, research fellow, senior research fellow, and then professor, and then distinguished professor. My question is, I'm not sure whether in Indonesia is it possible, Prof. Ud, that research fellow, senior research fellow, without this is without job of teaching. You mean only doing research and then becoming professor? And I would like to know the situation in Australia, whether is it possible only doing research and then becoming professor without teaching any?
Yep. I mean, okay, we need surgeons. So surgeons that are enthusiastic about being surgeons, that's terrific. But surgeons who prefer to do basic science to understand how cells, bodies work, genetics, all that sort of thing, that's terrific because they bring that clinical experience back to the laboratory, and that can guide the way in which they design the studies to understand the genetics of what they want to understand. The critical feature of that is the opportunity that is allowed for them to move back from the surgery back into a research environment in an institute or wherever. So if I was the leader of that institute or that department in a university or whatever, and I had the resources available to pay a salary to those people to do that work, then I would do it because it would lift the research performance of my unit.
Yeah, I think the most important, the most interesting is the salary between researcher and clinician in Japan almost similar. But I think here is there is a long gap between researcher and clinician.
Well, it's the same. It's the same in Australia as well. There's
in our hospital, more clinician interested in doing clinic work rather than research.
Yeah, but see, it depends on the motives, the personal motives of the person. The personal motives of somebody can be that I will give up a big salary doing surgery, because I'm more interested to understand the genetics of the cancer that I'm dealing with. And some surgeons will give up their surgery to do that. They probably are wealthy enough not to worry about how much money they earn at all. And so that's good. But it also, as I say, it also depends on an opportunity for that person to be employed somewhere to do that research. So for the leaders of research units, departments in universities, be an open mind to accepting some of those people to come in and do that research. Okay, on this track here, the question was?
Instead of continue from postdoctoral to lecturer and then becoming professor, you make a new flow after postdoctoral and research fellow, senior research fellow.
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mentioned when I gave my presentation that this is most commonly done by winning a research grant which pays you that salary. Okay? So you have to go out, you have to compete and win in a competition, national competition for research funding which pays your salary, in which case you can be employed in that university as a research fellow.
So with a job of teaching?
There's no teaching.
Oh, okay.
Full-time research, 100% research. And that's why a lot of these postdoc, they don't want to go through this and do all that boring teaching, all that exam marking, all of that, you know, having to do all of that. They're not interested in teaching, they're more interested in doing research, and so they follow that pathway. It's also the case now that more often universities are recognising that these people are very, very good for producing publications from the university, and so they will offer salary positions for people without them having to compete for it. They'll appoint them as a research fellow, and that can go on right down to this level here. So what I said was, win a research grant, you can fill this track here, but you don't have to. Universities are becoming more flexible in providing that track. Simply, I go back to the point I made. The amount of money that comes into the university that is won by research fellows based on publications, training of postgraduate students, doctoral students, and the grants that they win to fund their research, that all goes into a formula which determines how much money the university will get from the government. And that happens in lots of countries. So universities are very keen to have research fellows who are doing 100% research and no teaching. And what that means potentially down the track, and this is being talked about a lot in a lot of countries, is that this track will become teaching only and that track will become research only. And there's a question about, is that good or is it not so good? Because some people believe that it's important to have people who are experts in research doing the teaching. But you end up 30%, 30%, 30%. And that's not necessarily as productive as doing 100% for some people and 100% for other people doing different tasks. And that's a real challenge for setting up departments and running university departments. And how do you deal with that? You know, it's quite difficult.
Yeah, I think in our system, this path currently is not available. But what we are, this is a very recent discussion. What we are trying to advocate is that for those who want to do the research track, let's say research track, to have the majority of the proportion for research, say 70%, 80%, but then they still do teaching, but very low percentage. So at the end, then they could become something like research professor. Because right now in the university also we have a lot of faculty with FK rector, right? Sorry if I use you as an example. He's not PNS. Is FK rector. Yet if we look at the performance, he's leading the biggest research center at the faculty. So I can imagine also a few other people who are actually, they can be in that track. But because it's when we say research only, then immediately the door is shut. So we have to advocate with more of the percentage. So for those who are more keen to research, they still teach, but maybe with lower percentage and with different performance, I'm sure. Maybe Yeah, we don't know. We are just starting to advocate. Because if we could have that, then maybe we can be more supported by those who are in that track. Because we could still have the ideas, but because we are doing clinical work, we are doing teaching, then we have someone who do mostly research. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that one of the issues with the two tracks is that often a teaching position wouldn't be considered so prestigious. And your career possibilities cuts across several institutions, and more. It creates more. You are harder currency on the global market, as we talked about before.
Yeah, this is all very true, and let me just relay my own experience as a Vice-Chancellor. We went through this discussion at my university, and we were struggling with the promotion procedures for here. Did say in our promotion criteria was that the minimum percentage of time spent in teaching as an associate professor to go into a professor appointment, in other words, be promoted from there, was 20%. So at least 20% of their time had to be spent on teaching before they could get promotion to professor. So it wasn't 100%, 100%, it was 20-80, or in fact it was 20-20-60. So 60% research, 20% on service, community liaison, and 20% on teaching. That was the minimum teaching component which got you from associate professor to professor. So that was okay. But on the other side of it, how do you get from associate professor to professor on a teaching-only basis? And what we determined was that that was indeed possible to do, provided that you could show us from this level, your performance at this level to go to that level, that what you were doing was good scholarship in teaching. So you were designing new programs, you were actually implementing new strategies for doing teaching, you published that work, you published work in scholarly journals on teaching. In other words, you could show the university and the governing body of the university that you were actually performing research in teaching. Okay? So that was what we allowed through the system to get people who were very, very good teachers, adventurous teachers, innovative teachers, teachers who put out the word through their journal publications in teaching, that they were actually worthy of promotion to a professor. But if you were just doing teaching, just standing up in the classroom, just marking exams, then undoubtedly you wouldn't get through to being professor. You had to be innovative and you had to publish in teaching to get through to that final level. Just as you might have published to get through on the research track. Endowed professor?
Yeah, endowed professor. Is it same?
No.
Different?
I think so. I think endowed professor is a professor who's appointed to a position that's been funded by an endowment, which is, that word only means where does the money come from to pay for that professor. It's a different concept. This is recognition of distinguished career as a professor. Okay? So you're really, as I said, super duper professor, publishing lots every day, lots of students, lots of research grants, you know, working. Okay. You know.
How about the salary? Because in United States, if you are endowed professor, then they will get salary every month. But if you only usual professor, you will not get salary from university. That they have to have their grant and then they will get salary by grant.
That's correct, yes. Professors in the United States, at least when I was familiar with that system, they would be paid a salary for 9 months of the year, and they had to win grants to pay their salary for the other 3 months of the year. Whether that's the same now, I'm not sure, because it's a very, very competitive system, and sometimes professors miss out on that 3 months of salary because their grant isn't successful. So what happens under those circumstances, I don't know. Maybe they just live on 9 months' worth of salary over a year, I don't know.
My professor in Johns Hopkins University stated that the funny thing in United States, I don't have salary from, I don't get salary from university, but administrator will get salary from university, because if I'm not endowed professor, then the university don't pay me as a professor. But administrator,
what you're revealing there is the attitude of that professor. It's the attitude issue there, because the way you've expressed it may not be the professor, but the way you've expressed it is that that professor is telling people that they deserve a salary for the whole year. They have actually gone into a system where they fully expect, or they fully knew what they had to do to expect to have a salary for 12 months. That is 9 months of the university and 3 months of winning it on a research grant. They knew that when they got into it. And if they're complaining about it now because it's difficult, well, that's an attitude problem. Okay, and to compare themselves to somebody who's just the negative connotation of just being an administrator for 12 months of the year, that underscores the performance of the administrator who's actually trying to run the university. So it's to me, it smacks of a very negative attitude towards life in the university.
And even though you're on open-ended contracts, if you are not successful in raising your own funds, and if you're not successful to get a teaching position, you are out of the system. I guess as a administrator, you have an open-ended position, and you are not as much as a victim to that sort of, how to say, your success or otherwise. So you have a continuous position. And what I think sometimes is felt within the research community is that the conditions for being a researcher has deteriorated and are much more difficult than when they started their career. So yeah, it also has an attitude towards researchers in the society at large, I think. Yeah.
Okay, but before you run, just 2 announcements for tomorrow. So you have one easy homework, which is think of a multidisciplinary research project for your group. Multidisciplinary research project for your group. Yeah, because tomorrow we will work on it. That's easy. Because you can think of it during the night while you sleep. You get an inspiration. And for senior research fellow. And make sure one of your group, in your group, there is somebody who bring a laptop tomorrow, because we will work on the laptop. Okay? So just make sure somebody bring a laptop that you can work on the laptop. So that's easy, right? Bring a laptop and bring an idea, and that's it. Now you can go home and take a rest. See you tomorrow at 9. Thank you.